Okay. So, Bill, you can hear me. Thumbs up, right? I mean, we can't hear you because
Bill,
you're
muted.
you
Yes, I
mute.
can hear you. Yes, I can.
Okay.
Okay.
But we're hearing through there.
But it works.
Be that as it may.
Sort of.
Yeah, as long as it's not doing that weird feedback.
Yeah. If we're not, as long as we're not hearing it through both places.
Well, that's because this one's not going.
Right. That was the problem last time, is that I was
Yeah.
hearing it in both places and it was making me crazy. Which isn't hard to do. Okay. Are we recording?
Yes.
All right. Good evening, everybody. This is the June 3rd, 2024 subcommittee meeting of the Affordable Housing Committee. This is the Project Development Subcommittee.
Now you can shut yours off.
All right.
Okay. Okay, Bill?
Maybe you need to turn the volume a little higher.
So, can you hear now?
No, I can. That's fine.
Okay.
Okay. Everyone can hear, I think.
Yeah.
So let's call this meeting to order. It is 6:03. Let me do a roll call. Bill Perrette,
Here.
Jeff Williams,
Here.
Jane Williams,
Here.
Hillary Ormond here, Mike Sweeney,
Here.
and Kristen Nielsen is here. We also are joined by John Goodwin, and we have Paul Stone and Arnold Gardner with us as well. Okay, so let me figure out how to share. So I put together a little presentation to try and keep us on track.
You try to get this out of your way as much as possible.
Yeah, good enough. Okay, so everyone who's here has an agenda. It's a shorter agenda tonight, but I wanted to get us back together and reconvene after last month. As you guys recall, last month we passed out a map and a spreadsheet to start to look for sites in New Canaan. And I think that will be where we spend the bulk of our time tonight. But the first thing I wanted to revisit, and we probably will have to revisit this conversation regularly, is where we're headed with our 830G strategy. I know Jane sent out an email last week about some news, so let's just get everyone up to speed and make sure we all know where we're at and what's happening. So as you'll recognize this chart if you were here at the last meeting, and if you were at our full group meeting in May, which I think you all were, we discussed House Bill 5474 that was passed by the legislature this session, which allows unused viewpoints to be carried over for future moratoriums. And in our May 13th larger group meeting, we discussed what that may mean for us. Nothing is definitive yet at this moment, but what it may mean is that we need as few as 15, 16 viewpoints for a future moratorium in 2028, which is what the red box, the upper red box shows. If we lose the 830G lawsuits, then we'll have even more units, and we won't need to actually construct anything for future viewpoints for another moratorium. But then last week, the state denied our second attempt at a moratorium. And so the question is, what does that do? And really the answer is it doesn't do a whole lot other than we have to go back through the process again. For those of you who didn't read the article, basically the issue was that there was a public act passed by the legislature in 2017 that took effect in 2022, which removes the additional quarter point that you would get for 3-bedroom units. And so on the left side, you can see how New Canaan was calculating our viewpoints in the moratorium application that was just denied. And on the right side, you can see the Department of Housing's version of calculations, and the only difference is this quarter of a hue point. So for instance, on the right where you see we were calculating 4 units, 3-bedroom units at 1.75 hue points, or 75 unit hue points per unit. On the right, I think you can see the state was giving us 1.5. So all in all, we were down, I think, 3.5 hue points from what was required to achieve the moratorium. I think everybody knows we have those hue points sitting on the table. They just weren't included in this application. And so that's why we're going back through the process. Again, as far as I'm aware, I think we've already submitted that moratorium application this week. It's open for public comment now. And then I don't know the exact timeframes. I think it has to be open for public comment for like 60 days, 65 days, and then we submit it.
Oh, it was 20 days.
Maybe it's 20 days.
20 days, and then they have about 90 days.
June 17th.
I know it's about 3 months, probably until we get to the next 3 or 4
I think the
months.
state then has 90 days within which to decide whether to grant it or not. So you have 20 days open for public comment on the moratorium application here, and then it would be about
So
110
September.
days. Yeah. Right. Is that right? That's right, yeah.
So that's where we're at. You know, I'll be honest, I was a little deflated last week when I got this news. I'm sure we all were. And, you know, it made me question for a minute, like, where do we go from here? And these are just my thoughts, but I'm certainly open to other people's thoughts here. My opinion is we've constructed the units. We've spent a lot of resources in this town, both in terms of construction costs, in terms of staff costs, in terms of volunteer hours, and we've accumulated these viewpoints. And I take House Bill 5474 as validation that the legislature sees value in our ongoing strategy to build these larger affordable housing projects and to hold on to viewpoints as we need to and to carry them forward to next moratoriums. You know, we do continue to have tactical issues in getting a moratorium approved by the Department of Housing. This is now the second time we've had this. And it is kind of a frustrating process. So welcome to the world of 830G, where the interpretations and the legislation keeps changing, and therefore the target keeps moving. And yet, with all that being said, I think, again, because the town has invested so many resources in the strategy that we've been employing for the last 5 to 10 years, which is to have the housing authority build these larger scale public housing projects, that's the course we're on, and I think we need to stay the course. And I think ultimately we'll end up back where we thought we were May 13th, which is only needing probably 7 to 10 units for the near term, meaning for another moratorium in 2028. And longer term, we'll need 70 to 100 units, again, depending on how everything on that other chart shakes out. You guys have other thoughts on this? I mean, basically, I just want to make sure we're on the same page that we're still going down this road that we've been going down, but if anyone wants to discuss.
Assuming all that is true, it does seem that it gives us some flexibility in terms of, I mean, we tossed around the term small ball, et cetera, and saw it up there somewhere, that, you know, there is the possibility of doing things slightly differently because we'll have time.
Right, yes, and I think, again, that's where we ended May 13th, and I think that's where I want to pick back up now, is that we do have some options. Okay, so then let's talk about what we're calling small ball and big ball, and I wish I'd come up with more creative names, but that's what we've been calling them, so that's just what I'm gonna call them for now, until someone comes up with something a little more fancy. And I think we all know, but like, let's really talk for a minute about what this means and what approaches we're going towards here. In my mind, the small ball approach is smaller scale development scattered around town. Ultimately, that will mean we'll have more sites in play for affordable housing, but they'll be much less dense, possibly even single family homes. It won't, you know, be a massive project. Big ball in my mind is more like a Cannon Parish or a Milford. It's a bigger scale development concentrated on 1 or 2 larger sites, possibly phased over time like we did at Milford. And they both have pros and cons, and the pros and cons are almost like the mirror opposite of each other. You look at those, I mean, it was almost silly when I put it together. I was like, why do I need 2 charts? It's really just one. But ultimately, doing the small ball approach means you have less cost up front because you can kind of piecemeal, this parcel and that parcel and that parcel, so you don't need tens of millions of dollars in the kitty to get started. But it's less cost effective in terms of the price per unit. We're hearing, I think we've heard the numbers, $450,000 to $600,000 per affordable unit. And I think those are numbers that are usually in, more like a Canaan parish. So when you start doing it on a unit by unit basis, I imagine that number only grows. The upside of the small ball approach is that you can act more quickly as smaller sites become available. You don't have to wait until you have the perfect one ready to go. But because you're doing this over time, over a series of smaller sites, it's also going to take longer to accrue enough viewpoints for a moratorium, especially when you need a larger number of viewpoints. One of the things I personally like about the small ball approach is that I think it does a better job of integrating the low income demographic into our community. Whereas the big ball approach concentrates or isolates lower income residents into a specific project or part of town. But then on the flip side, one of you pointed, it might have been Bill Brett pointed this out to me, that when you do the scatter site approach, you're going to possibly have NIMBYs every step of the way. And for those of you that aren't familiar with NIMBYs, it's a planning word we use for not in my backyard. I'm sure you all know what it is. Whereas when you do a single site, yes, there will be neighbors that have issues, but you'll deal with those neighbors and it won't hopefully be an ongoing situation. I think the smaller approach will probably blend better with our town as we see our town today. It will be a challenge to take a bigger project and help it fit into the scale of our town. Having a scattered site though also is an administrative challenge because now you've got units all over the place. So like I said, it's almost, they sound great and then they have the same opposite problems. And I'm open to other pros and cons, but where I think we may be headed, and Jane kind of just alluded to this, is what I'm going to call the hybrid approach, is where we take a little bit of each of those approaches and hopefully, because we have some time, we think we have some time, we can use each approach in a more tactical way where it's appropriate, when it's appropriate. So for instance, if it turns out for 2028, we only need 7 to 10 units for a moratorium, then we probably don't need to pursue a huge project at that time. That being said, should we be planning for a huge project? Probably, but we don't have to, have that ready to go. And it allows us to set short-term and long-term goals. It allows us to stage development in a timing that works. And I think it also does a really great job of layering and integrating affordable housing into the landscape of our town. So that, it's not just one size fits all, which is a term we hear a lot, but it's all different sizes. And I think hopefully over time that becomes normalized, that it's not even an issue that there's an affordable unit or 10 affordable units in this project. I think the issues that we have to contend with, probably regardless of the approach, is that we have to ultimately, this is down the road, but figure out how we're going to oversee all of these units, whether they're in one building or multiple buildings. The financing, which the other subcommittee is working on. How much of this is publicly constructed versus privately constructed? And I think, as we start to think about this and have more time to think about this, I know we've talked for the last couple months we've been together about the housing authority or the town being the sole purveyor of affordable housing units in this town, but there may be an opportunity to incentivize private development to do some of this work for us. We have the time to think about it. Affordability mix and unit types need to be considered. How much affordability we want a project to be. For instance, do we need to do another Canaan parish that's 100% affordable, or could we do something that's less than that? And then, this is all been stuff we've talked around the edges at, but down the road, considering other housing needs such as senior housing, adults with disabilities, workforce housing. So what are your thoughts? Is there a strong, I only want to do big ball, I only want to do small ball, I'm in on hybrid? What do you guys think about these options?
Krista, we could not, it's just a question, we couldn't accomplish our objective, I would think, just with small ball, right? Near term and long term.
I think we could.
You think so? Okay.
I think it would be, I think it would be a heavy lift. I think it would be a challenge. But I do think we have the benefit of time right now to give us some time to figure out how to do that. I just,
Right.
you know, so I wouldn't rule it out. I think it would be tough, and I think we would probably need some partners. I'm not sure that the town by themselves can do a great job of being in the land banking business and buying small sites and deed restricting them and flipping them or holding them, you know, however the town chooses to handle small.
And probably a little bit dependent upon, probably a little bit dependent upon whether the goals change at the state level, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's another upside of the hybrid approach is that it kind of, like I said, makes us more nimble, that when the tide's against us, we can go left, and when the tide's for us, we can go right, you know, whatever that looks like. But we're not wed to one specific approach. You know, we can move as things move, which I'm sure they will.
Thank you.
I think it also allows us to be opportunistic. Hybrid approach, so to keep our eyes open and ears open for opportunities and consider various ways to get to 100% what we need. Just having more flexibility seems like an advantage.
Excuse me, this is Maria Weingarten. I just wanted to also mention quickly that the low-income housing tax credits that usually pay for 30% of any project, they're only available on larger projects, I think over 30 units or so. I think the last time we discussed that, I think so. I think we have to keep that in mind as well, that when we're doing the small ball, depending on how small that ball is, it might be problematic for us because then we're covering 100% of the carry on those.
Okay. That's good to know. Mike, were you gonna say something?
On the management side of things, I think you alluded to it earlier, but having too many scattered projects, it becomes a real headache in management. I just know from the housing authority, even with the overlay with Canaan Parish now, it's just, and those are two large things we have. It just exacerbates, what has to be done in management. So that's another real problem. I think Maria's right too. I remember when we did the financing on one of the projects, there were thresholds that you had to hit, both with the private financing, with the grants that we got from the state. And I don't remember what the threshold is. I think Maria's right on that. But my only general thought was one that I think occurred to all of us last time, was that if we could find a site where maybe we could do some phasing, and phase one gets us our 7 or 10 units, if that's where we end up, and then we get our COs on it. Maybe we do a larger project, maybe it's a mix, so it's not 100%. Or I know there's been some concern about doing that, particularly where it's located in town. But then we're ready and we're poised for the next step. We can start thinking about, if we have a large enough site, we get the economy scale right, then we can start thinking about phase two, maybe 4 years down the road. I'm sure it would be nice if we were in one plot, where we could kind of do a master plan and kind of manage, the next immediate couple of years to get the 7 or 10 units, and then start thinking about 4 years down the road. That's challenging in of itself, but doing multiple sites, I think it just multiplies, the complexity.
I agree. The other thing I'll say is in terms of the small ball approach, I mean, we are sort of doing it already. And I say that in the sense that our inclusionary zoning regulations that require multifamily projects over 5 units to include an affordable component. We haven't had a lot of traction on that so far. We've had a lot of projects come through, but in theory, over time, you are going to start to get that scattered site approach. There is no plan at the moment to kind of consolidate the management of those individual affordable units into one sort of management entity. I don't think that's a bad idea. We're not far enough along yet that that's really been considered. But regardless of kind of what we decide to do around this table, that is already sort of happening out there.
Yeah, I mean, Brutus will be built. I mean, since at some point, unless someone decides to, redo the whole concept there, then something's gonna happen on Pine Street one day. I don't know when, but, across from,
When we just had a
Xerox.
pre-application this month at planning commission for, I can't think of the address, but the building on Main Street that has the white slats on the front of it. To come in as, I think, 12 unit development that would have 1 or 2 affordable units as part of
yeah, so
that.
there's like 3 or 4 on Brutus and, maybe someday Pine Street comes in at 5 or 6. I'm not sure what.
Yeah,
So, yeah, those things will pop up, but they're gonna be little
Right.
pieces.
and I mean, I don't know that we can't, in my opinion, count on them until they're actually CO'd for a few points for a moratorium. I mean, they're good to kind of have as sort of like some extras to lean towards when we need them, but.
It's nice to say we have them approved, but it doesn't get us anywhere until they're built.
Right.
And we don't have any control over when they're built
Right.
necessarily, right? So, Maria, are you there? She's not. Just.
Yes, I am. Sorry about that. I
No,
just
no
had to
problem.
find my mute button, unmute.
Don't worry about it. So I'm sure you have been, and I've been trying to track HB 5474. Do you know offhand? I would think the governor only has a few more days within which he could veto it.
Right.
Right.
So I saw as of the 31st that it was, it had received an act number.
Okay.
But last time I checked, it hadn't yet, been signed, but I'll look online again real quick, but, I hadn't seen that it had gone through yet.
Yeah, I just checked. I didn't see that it had gone through, but perhaps my search isn't great. But it would become law as long as he doesn't veto it within 12 or 15 days.
That's correct. That's the new policy, is that unless something is vetoed, it automatically passes.
Okay, so we'll just keep an eye on that too, because that would obviously change the calculus, or if the Department of Housing decided to challenge it for some reason. Yeah, agreed. So I'm actually very sort of, I don't know if the word is agnostic or just unsure right now about which approach I think is best. There's a part of me that really wants to swing for the fences and get a large development going, but I guess it all depends on what sites we can agree on, because we know that land is scarce or expensive, and if we're gonna work within town-owned property or try to get state-owned property, that might limit us or not.
Krista, is there some place we could go who really has excelled, so to speak, in small ball and just talk to some of the people, interview them to better understand that? Like, one thing I want to understand would, if you had a small ball approach for the affordable housing residents, what do they prefer? And then if you had a 12-unit development with two small ball units in it, what does that do to the economic, not the economics, but what does that do to the occupancy of the others? And do people want to be there? And is there a stigma and all sorts of stuff like that? Because I think there are a lot of advantages to it, and the tax credit is something you'd have to look at, but maybe that's workable. So if we could figure out there's one area that maybe done a good job with respect to this, we could talk to them. I'd volunteer to do that.
Yeah, I don't know anything off the top of my head, but certainly happy to work with you and do some research and see if we can find examples of places. I mean, I know that it exists. I just don't know, the names of places.
Can I jump in?
Does John Goodwin know the names of places?
No, but, well, actually, no, that's not true. I have some ideas, but you're exactly right, is we need to, if people have the bandwidth and are willing to jump in and do some research. I know Jane and I chatted about it. Jane's making some phone calls. I have to make some phone calls. Other parts of my life get in the way. But yes, Bill, you're spot on. I mean, we need, this is a concept, which I think is a wonderful concept, because it really, it can truly add value to areas that complement town, potentially currently run down, can be rehabbed, rebuilt. So I think from a social contribution perspective, I think that it's a great concept. But the challenge is, yeah, economically, does it work? You know, how do you drive it?
I think operationally, trying to do several in a row is a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, well, one of the things and on that, Jeff, is we could look at trying to stimulate it through changes to planning and zoning regulations. So, but yeah, you're exactly right. So, no, what I would say to everybody is I'm a little frustrated is the wrong word. I'm racking my brain, you look at what's the best way to really develop this and get in front of experts.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, the closest thing I can say that I've personally seen to it, and I know I always go back to my time in Costa Katrina, New Orleans, but there was a lot of vacant housing and empty lots, and the New Orleans Redevelopment Authority took ownership of those, and then put them out through RFP for smaller nonprofits that worked in affordable housing to redevelop. They weren't deed restricting them. There's no 830G equivalent in Louisiana. For all intents and purposes, most every single house that was being built was quote unquote affordable, just because of the demographic. But I mean, that's where I've seen it done, but obviously there are very different circumstances underlying how the government came into being the owner of so much land. So we don't exactly have that situation here. All right, well then I think we keep the options all open and see where we go.
I'm particularly interested in what Mike talked about in terms of taking control of a large parcel of property and starting to
Phase it.
phase it.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it gives us a little bit of flexibility in how we go about it.
And I mean, that's something that we can all get our heads around, right? Like we saw that with Millport, we saw that with Canaan Parish, and maybe those were even larger phases than we want to do, but we've seen that in action.
I know I've asked this a million times before. What is the buildable acreage of Canaan Parish? Just for some, is it 3 acres that was
We
buildable?
talked about that.
We did,
I think it's like
I don't
3.5.
because I think the total parcel is like 4, but some of it's like wetlands.
There's
Yeah.
wetlands down there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of slope too that had to be cut, that
Right.
it's not buildable going down toward the pond. I don't remember the name.
If I remember correctly, Scott said there was the possibility of adding, but it would be painful. It would, I don't know if that means that, it's a wetland situation or it's a slope situation,
It's
but
really slopes
yeah,
situation.
so it sounded as if in theory it was possible, but
I'm just trying to think of
Like how big?
pieces of land that we have that could accommodate a phased approach.
Well, I think some of the ones we came up with are gonna be possibilities.
Again, that was spread out too. I mean, there's a lot of common space in there. The parking was underneath, but in between the buildings. Sure, when you walked around, you saw this, some nice open
Yeah,
space.
it's great.
Yeah.
it's really nice.
Which you don't have to do that. You can desk pack it more, but something's attractive about King Parish, I think.
Have you guys seen the other one? Margarita Alvin mentioned it when she spoke to us, and Darien, something O'Neill,
Oh,
the Heights.
Across from the firehouse.
Yeah. I mean, that's another one that is very nicely done. I imagine it was maybe phased. It's more of it's less apartment building like and more kind of townhouse.
Yeah.
But it looks like it has like a building for common space and has green space in there. I don't know, might be interesting to talk to Darien Housing Authority or whoever did that and find out, what their approach was.
I think both David and Randy talked a bit about the pros and cons of a big versus a smaller, more integrated into the community approach, and how there are upsides and downsides. But I think that was part of the learning that's going on currently. Is what's better, to your point, for residents, and what's better for the whole community, and better for costs, et cetera. So lots to balance.
All right, so let's move on then to item 4 on the agenda, which is getting back to everybody's homework that I asked you to do. Let me try and do this. Let me see. So one of the things I asked you guys to do, in addition to just looking at the map and the spreadsheet that I provided, was to think about what criteria you were using. And luckily, you all used about the same criteria, so there wasn't a lot of conflict or too much thinking on my part in terms of putting this down. So here's what I've collected, and as I wrote this down, I think almost all of these could work for either approach, whether we're looking for scattered, I mean, I think the criteria is essentially the same, with maybe one or two exceptions. Whether we're looking for, you know, one big project or many small projects. So the first thing that everyone seemed to agree on, at least for now, for the sake of expediency, is to look for town-owned or state-owned land, municipally owned land. Everyone agreed that it needs to have access to public sewer. And then walkability was a big one. I think that list there after the dot sort of includes everything that people talked about. Downtown, the amenities in downtown, grocery stores, schools, parks, the train station. The potential for adequate parking on site, whether it's decked or not. And somebody said this specifically, the potential for mixed use on site, especially I think if it's in the downtown area. Obviously in a more residential neighborhood, that'd be less important, but in the downtown core, you know, the potential to have whatever commercial retail on the ground floor is a big factor. And then some of the comments I kind of pulled together in number 6 myself based on some of the feedback I heard about different options, or that we want to minimize negative impacts on public services, for instance, congestion, traffic congestion close to a fire station, pitting all of the children in a large development into the same one of the elementary schools versus another. So that's just another criteria to weigh. And also, I think we all agree on like trying to avoid natural resources. That's why we put the wetlands, the floodplain data into the spreadsheet so that you guys can see that. So does that seem like, I mean, I think it was pretty straightforward to me, but does anybody feel like I forgot anything that they felt was important? And like I said, I mean, obviously we can refine this, but I think it's a great starting point, and I think it's important for the public to know that, you know, we weren't just willy-nilly picking sites. We had some reasoning behind it, and for now, this is what we're gonna go with.
Krista, I had a feeling just from the few that I read that when people hit reply all, that also traffic impact, traffic congestion was a factor in people's minds that was mentioned. Does that sound right?
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah, and I would throw that kind of under public services, is the roadways and the traffic congestion as well.
Krista, could you elaborate a little bit on number 3, and you know, the walkability, and then also, you know, just what the thinking on the natural resources are. Number 3, I guess I could read that to say, well, I guess that means we want to do it downtown, you know, like on Elm Street. But it doesn't say that. I was just wondering sort of what the thinking is behind that, because there are lots of places where parks and where you can walk to transportation and so on. So.
Right. So I mean, I would say the main point I would take away from number 3 is that people wanted a site that was walkable. And obviously, maybe it's not obvious, the list of things that follow that, they're not all necessarily walkable from the same site. For instance, sites that are downtown, I mean, you could walk to the schools, but chances are you're not going to, like you're further than a walking distance to the school. So they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but these were the types of places that we thought it should be walkable to. I doubt we would check the box for every single one of those on a single site, although that would certainly be a unicorn and we'd be open to it. But I think the idea was walkable to as many of those items as we can get. And then in terms of, oh, go ahead.
So for example, I mean, I'm not suggesting Irwin Park, but would that, I'm not suggesting that we do that, but would that eliminate Irwin Park? Number 3?
I
don't understand.
very walkable to downtown
and walkable to a
and the
park.
nature center and its own park.
Yeah.
It's just deed restricted.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's other issues with
Yeah.
that one in particular, but no, I wouldn't cross Irwin Park off because of walkability. To me, that would still meet the criteria. One that we'll come to talk about, I think, in a few minutes, for instance, the mulch pile or the leaf pile. That one may struggle in terms of, I mean, certainly it's walkable to Waveney Park, but is it,
It's not walkable downtown.
it's not walkable to downtown. I suppose you could walk to Talmadge Hill from there. I'm not sure you want to, that one I think would be a little questionable in the walkability department. Again, I don't know that every single site is going to meet every single one of these criteria, but I think we
Okay.
laid these out as our
Things we want
gold
to-
standard and
Yeah.
we'll get as close as we can.
And I think, there, to your point, there are trade-offs. So like, for instance, Canaan Parish isn't necessarily walkable to town, but it does have a lot of beautiful open space and it has a playground and, and the mulch pile would probably be the same type of thing where it's large and you could have more open space there. If you did it at like Richmond Hill, let's say, or the lumberyard, you're walkable to Mead and Irwin. So you do have that open space sort of available to you, even if you can't integrate it in because it's in a downtown setting. So I think to your point, it's almost impossible to be walkable to everything, but you can make it park-like or livable and close to whatever you can.
Yeah, and I mean, I
And there are
guess
trade-offs for everything.
my thought, to your point, based on things we've seen come before planning commission is the closer you are to downtown, the less you need to provide on your site. So for instance, if we were to do the leaf pile, you need to have some sort of open space amenity and parking and whatnot for people. When Waveney Life Care came to us and wanted to do something on Oak Bridge and they wanted to put, an indoor dining and a movie theater inside and a fitness center and all of these things, part of me was saying, that's great. I understand why seniors would want all of that in their building. And part of me saying, you want to be here because it's walkable to downtown. And we have a restaurant we have restaurants downtown. We have a movie theater downtown. Like, if you can't have both. So if you want to have everything in-house, then you need to be probably a little further out of town. And if you want to take advantage of the amenities that are in town, then you can do it on
Yeah,
a
so
small scale.
I think amenities is a lot of things.
Yes.
It's shopping, it's town hall, it's access to the urban medical care, it's
Mhm.
access to the sundry stores, all that kind of stuff. And I think of, especially the number 3 item, it's really trying to optimize it. It's what can you put in the space or what already exists that you will be close to in a
Right.
particular location.
So that you're not having to provide it on site.
Yeah.
Well said, nearby, yeah.
So I guess I was wondering that when just listening to it, and I'm not, I think what you have there is fine, but maybe what's not there, if you were to build, I don't know, a 300 family or, rooms, what would that do to traffic? So, that you'd have to weigh that against the negative. And as long as that it becomes a balance of what you put down and what you don't put down. Because actually some of the parks, downtown, schools, public transportation and amenities could be the most valuable property. And depending on what you're trying to accomplish, to solve an issue or problem, do you want to use your most valuable property? So I don't disagree with anything we have here. It's just that as long as they're points rather than, it's not like a scorecard, right? It's not like we're gonna pick a property because it meets A, B, C, and D. Or if it is, maybe we should discuss it more.
Right, yeah, I mean, it wasn't my intent that
Yeah.
every property we choose is gonna meet every single one of these. It was more, this is what we're aiming for, we'll shoot for the stars and land somewhere else,
Well, the other thing too would be, I think if trying to be independent in this, is if you read this as being close to downtown, that might be the right answer, but that would, that would touch a lot of people who are close to downtown and leave out a lot of people who aren't close to downtown. So just need to understand it.
Well, I also think that number 2, access to public sewer is going to force us to be close to downtown. I mean, not solely in the core of the village necessarily, but I think we all recognize that our sewer infrastructure is limited and doesn't go throughout the town, so you're already kind of constrained in your area based on wanting to be on public sewer. So, I mean, and honestly, 2 and 3 go together. Most of the places that are on public sewer are gonna be walkable and vice versa, so.
Right.
It does,
Okay.
it does push us in a certain direction. I agree. Okay, so I don't hear any other major criteria that we feel were left off the list.
No, I think those are, I think that covers it.
All right, so here then is the sort of short list of what I heard from everybody by email. The numbers in parentheses after are how many people recommended. There's 6 of us on this subcommittee, so 6 out of 6 means we all thought that that was a great site. Obviously 1 out of 6 is just a one-off, and I think in all those cases, that one-off was me. I'll take ownership of it.
They're good ideas.
Yeah, I just figured like, let's put them all out here and we
Yeah.
can cross them off. So basically we came back with a bunch of parking lots, except for the mulch pile, which is not a parking lot, but kind of like a parking lot for leaves.
Very fancy.
And so, yeah, I mean, this was the list. I think that, if we want to go, the top choices that I put 1 through 3 are the ones that most people seem to think were good ideas for various reasons. And we can kick those around. Do you guys want to talk about those? Do you want to talk about what we do with the list now that we have a short list? In my mind, these were all what I would call big ball sites or sites that could sustain some sort of phased approach over time. Some of them are more medium sized, like the Richmond Hill parking lot. Actually, let me just skip ahead for a second and give you an example of where I'd like to see this go. I only did one of these. I didn't have time to do every single one, but so Richmond Hill, it's 3/4 of an acre. So I mean, it's a small site,
Yeah.
ultimately, but it is right in downtown, near the train station, walkable to a lot of things. So, I think it fits the bill. I don't know how much you could actually get on that parcel. That might be like medium ball, middle-sized ball. But anyway, I think most of them fall in that range.
And it's nice because it's sort of down and then you've got the view right there. So even if you did have to go a little bit taller, I mean, it might shade the homes that are next to it, but because of the slope of it, you could probably go a little higher,
Yeah, so
Then
that was
3 or 4 floors.
one of my questions is, I didn't have the time to research what is the actual change in topography on that site. I suspect could be 10 feet. I don't know. Do you reckon? You're not talking.
I'm happy to, but
No, I hear you. Thanks.
So yeah, there's a pretty substantial topography change from Park Street down to Richmond Hill. That site also, one of the upsides is that it is in the apartment zone. And Richmond Hill is actually a really interesting street in terms of zoning. I've spent some time looking at it in the past because a lot of different zones come together, but that end there, basically from where you can see the little notch out of the pink parcel that is Mead Park, almost straight across. And then on the other side of Park Street, that's all apartment zoning. So, while there are single family homes there, and I'm not saying there shouldn't be single family homes there, they are in an apartment zone. So that's an area that I think is ripe and probably has been ripe for some time for redevelopment in terms of higher density. And that's certainly what it's been zoned for, probably for a long time, like since the 60s. I don't think that's recent. I think that's been around for a while. Which I think makes it a little easier to sell, that this is what that type of site's zoned for, as opposed to something that's not zoned for multifamily housing. So anyway, skipping ahead, this type of information is what I was thinking we can and should do for each of these. I think I already told you guys, my plan is to basically plagiarize the police facility site selection, which is
Not a bad site selection.
Richmond wasn't on there, I didn't plagiarize
Yeah,
this
I
one, I
know,
had
I
to do a
Yeah.
little bit of research. But the type of data, the type of information for each one. And so I was thinking that in terms of next steps, that we could split up some of those sites that we all thought were good sites, to the extent that we agree on those, and, you know, for our next meeting, come back with more information. Another thing that I think could be useful to find out, I have no idea if it exists for Richmond Hill, but I know for some of the other sites in town, parking lots in particular, like Locust Street, that the town has gone through iterations of development plans in the past, at least for deck parking. I don't know if there was any housing ever proposed. And to know, what past proposals were and why they did or didn't ever go anywhere, and kind of what issues they confronted, that could all be useful information as we go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay,
You guys think that's a good idea? All right.
Yeah.
all those ones that only have one, you gotta do all of them.
I was gonna propose something else for myself, but we'll cover that. Okay, well, so I think 1, 2, and 3, we probably definitely need to do, and to give it away to the people that want the easy work. 2 and 3 are definitely in this police site selection book, so. I mean, there's, probably some different criteria you're looking for if you're gonna put a police station there versus affordable housing, but you can get some good basic data there. I don't know if there's been, I'm sure there must have been, back all the way going to when the Avalon proposed to be on the lumberyard lot, there must have been development concepts drawn up for that site. Do you know of any, John?
Avalon's right before my time. But yeah, over the years, there's.
Yeah, I mean, it's an obvious choice, so I'd be surprised if there weren't at least 2 or 3 or 4
Yeah.
iterations of what could be built there. And I'm happy to, I think Sarah Carey, the town planner, that maybe that's just because who I always go to, but that's who I would go to, and I'm happy to connect, anybody with her in terms of historical information that she can pull up. The town clerk may have historical information that they can pull up. Beyond that, I don't know what other resources we have in terms of finding out more information about these parcels other than hearsay. And
Yeah, Avalon definitely had a plan for the Olympians. It got pretty far along. I think I was just maybe living in the town at the time, but then they did the switch with the current site when they did the trade. I don't know if that stuff's still around or not, but.
I think there's boxes in the basement of town hall.
That's okay.
And I remember someone was, I don't know if it was Malazi or Bob, was looking at the lumberyard at one point. I don't know if I ever got to do any conceptual plans, but there was a plan to go out through Grove Street. Because
We bought that house.
yeah, and at that time they didn't have that house, but they were looking for an exit, out to Grove because it'd be so tight there. But I know there was some thinking on it, but I don't know if anything ever got beyond just using it.
Steve Kleppen kicked it around from time to time, so if whoever's tackling that can speak to Steve.
Now, for instance, I know in the planning department downstairs, I think in what's now the conference room, I've seen for number 5 iterations.
Yeah.
I think, on the parking lot here, up here behind the playhouse, being decked. Yeah, decked parking.
Yeah.
I don't think it had housing on top, but again, I think pretty much all of the municipal lots, maybe with the exception of Horse Court, have had some study of, should we deck it, should we not deck it? And I think that's one thing with each of these we'd have to consider is how much parking is there now? And we proceed with the assumption that the town does not want to lose that parking, so we're gonna have to provide X number of spots in whatever we, were to construct, plus whatever is needed to support the residential component or commercial component of the project, so.
And I think there's a thinking afoot to make Elm Street paid parking and some or all of the parking lots not paid, free, so that, you'd almost have to provide that free parking deck to the town. I can't imagine the town would not want
Right.
a significant number of parking spaces, since that will be where
The
people
majority.
do not have to pay. So the thinking is you would send people directly to a parking lot instead of people trolling out to try and find a free closed parking space.
Who does that?
Everybody.
I've never done it.
Everybody.
Yeah. So that's just a piece of the calculus if we thought about decking, we'd have to probably provide the town with, you know, an equal number or not substantially lower
Right,
number of parking spaces.
I would assume that would,
Yeah.
off of that assumption.
You know, Locust already has a pretty good demand already from town employees, and I think even as much as zoning approvals out there, they're dependent upon the ability to buy parking there, so you
Yeah,
know, you buy 2 or 3, 4 permits per year, so I know there are a lot of private owners depend on a lot.
yeah, I mean, speaking in a different capacity, I was just commenting on some draft stuff for the plan of conservation and development today, and that's one thing I think the town does need to think about. We're getting pressure, and I think it's great to have more residential downtown, for instance, this building on Main Street. In the retail A zone, we don't require any parking for commercial or residential buildings, and I don't think we're at a place where this town is gonna have residences without any parking. So if there's not parking being allowed on site, or if there isn't any place to put parking on site, then the town lots, you know, like you're saying, buying spaces by permit is probably where some of these things are gonna go to. So there may be pressure for even more parking than what currently exists down the road if we continue to add residential development in town.
And Morse Court is losing some parking spaces, right? They're gonna make those bigger.
Yeah, I think the
Yeah.
aisles have to get bigger.
Yeah. And the spaces, because. I mean,
But that idea was broached, the Morse
Yeah.
court idea was broached at the walkability.
Mhm.
oh, yeah.
And I wonder whether, I can't remember whether, yeah, he did have one.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that was just sort of back of a napkin, or whether he had some of the information that we'd be looking for in life.
I don't
I
know.
don't know.
I was wondering just how you might think about sorting down the list. I mean, there are a lot of advantages to Richmond Hill, and that's probably why it's number one. But when you go to Locust Avenue parking lot, you know, I bet you today a parking space cost, you know, if we would just make that into a multi-tier parking lot, it's probably $45,000 a space just to build it. You know, forget about the housing for a moment. So I'm just, you know, I'm wondering how we would view that project from an economic standpoint. Because if, you know, are we looking at the parking garage separate from the affordable housing? How do you measure cost? How do you finance it and so on? So, you know, that would be, so as you begin to dive into some of these, there'll be a lot of questions like that that might change the sorting. And well, it's the Lumber Yard's terrific, but you know, that's, as I'm sure all of you know, that's, you know, sort of right in the middle of a lot of great opportunities there. And so the long-term plan would have to be something the town and all the planning departments would have to really consider.
Which one, the lumberyard?
Say again?
I just missed which one you were talking about. You were talking about
Lumberyard.
lumberyard.
Number 3, the Lumber Yard, you know, it's just, when you look at it, I mean, when you look at that part of town, there's a lot that can be done there. So this would have to be part of, well, I would think the town would want to have that part of a much bigger plan for that whole section of town.
Mhm.
Oh,
Can
my
I just
question-
ask a question on number 7? I know that was only got a 1 out of 6. I would have given it I would have voted for that spot too, only in conjunction with trying to get state property as well, because there's the state parking lot there as well. So it's not as small as we think. It's like 2/10 of an acre is the town property, but I've got to believe there's at least, I don't know, 1/3 of an acre or more in that further back, closer, backing up to the train station. So I guess that is an area where I've thought about, at least for mixed use on the street level, opportunity for parking, and then it's just a question of whether we would have to move the state spaces to somewhere else, whether we could maybe, given the fact that this is a much more attractive place to have housing, because it is in the downtown, maybe the state would be willing to take some spots at Talmadge Hill instead, where we lack the ability to build housing there in many ways. So So there might be some opportunity there. And again, I would say that that's a medium ball. It's not a big ball, but I think that that's actually a really good opportunity that we shouldn't just dismiss out of hand so quickly.
Yeah, I kind of, in my mind, combined that with the lumberyard, but that might be a mistake. It feels related, but to your
Yeah.
point, Maria, it could be its own small ball, small/medium ball.
Just feels so narrow to me.
Yeah, it would, there'd be some design challenges for sure.
Yeah.
But it is.
But it is
a
an
great
opportunity,
location.
absolutely.
It's not as narrow if you add that state land behind it, right? So I'm not talking about just the part that where the mailboxes are. I'm talking about the actual state parking lots back there. It wouldn't be, I think, much wider than Richmond Hill. It's probably about the same.
Okay. Maybe that's my optical illusion, but I just think of that parking lot as narrow, but granted, I don't spend a lot of time there because I don't have parking. I do park in that municipal lot a ton when I'm going to the north end of Elm and you can't
Yes,
park.
yes.
I think that's pretty well utilized during the day.
I always called it the Mrs. Green's grocery store parking.
Yeah.
Because that's how I first knew it, was parking there with two little kids and trying to cross the
Totally.
street with a grocery cart.
Yeah.
All right, so my thoughts in terms of how we move ahead, I know some of you guys want to run or have to run to the finance committee next, so I'll try and move this along, is that we each take a big ball site and kind of do some homework, sort of like what I've done here for Richmond Hill, but we could go further. Like I mean, I did this literally in 15 minutes, so we could spend some more time, obviously, than that, but that's sort of a rough start at it. So, and then sort of parallel to that, you can see here on the right, you can sort of see on the right, the screen is in front of it, and I'm not gonna touch that. I'll tell you what it says. I parked some ideas of my own for exploring small ball, and I think that what Bill said and what John said earlier about needing to research how this has worked in other places is an important piece of it. When I looked at that list and the map, I saw things, and I probably will make people angry, and obviously none of this is written in stone, but like the Ed Dixon Park, Kiwanis Park, I mean, those are largely underutilized, at least from what I can see. I mean, obviously we'd have to talk to the Parks Department and whatnot, but there may be opportunities of smaller owned parcels in town. There was a random parcel at the intersection of 123 and Ledge Avenue that probably used to have a house on it that the town owns, and it's not big, it's a quarter acre. But looking for opportunities like that was something that I was going to take on. It's sort of like, what could small ball look like? What options do we have that could fit into this scenario? What have other places done successfully? So that's where I was gonna offer to put my time, is in that, what I put in the parking lot over there, is not for today, but for the future, so that we could kind of, again, continue to move on parallel paths, so that we're not just putting everything in one pathway. Does that sound like that works? All right, so if I take the small ball path, do you guys wanna?
I'll do lumberyard.
Okay.
I'll work on the mulch pile.
So that one has deed restrictions.
Yeah.
Look at that, okay.
Yep.
And I'm sure somehow through town hall, maybe through the town clerks, you could find out exactly what those are. I'm pretty sure it's open space. And who are you coming to steal?
We're heading that way in just a moment.
I just have to
We're
give
gonna
them, I just have to give them the homework assignment. And then you can go.
Quick, give them something hard.
All right, Jeff, what's the hardest one? What do you want? Bill, do you have one that you want to choose?
I couldn't hear all of the dialogue, but I'm happy to help in, 2, 3, or 4. I mean, depending on what other people are doing. So I couldn't hear all of that. So you're trying to assign these sites, right, to somebody? So just put me in,
Yeah.
put me in where you need me.
Okay,
If I had, I would 4, 3, and 2 would be my order of preference.
okay, I think 4, 3, and 2 are taken. So I'll give you,
Let's look at multiple support.
okay. All right, how about we do that? Bill, you're gonna take the mulch pile and Jane's gonna take more squirt. Does anyone want to do that municipal lot on the corner of Park and Pine? Mike, Park and Pine. And Kristen. All right, before I forget, we do have some public here. Do we have public comments that we want to take?
I'm gonna say the mulch pile thing, my understanding is that it's deed restricted and you can't do anything with it. So I'm gonna go do your due diligence, but my understanding, I mean, I don't know how hard it would be. My understanding is very hard to take something that's deed, I mean, somebody who's an attorney, to take something that's deed restricted and change it, to make it buildable. Maybe it's possible, I don't know, but that's been looked at before for a number of different things, like senior housing, we looked at it. It was off the table because it was deed restricted, so that's gonna be the first thing we're gonna run into on that.
I think that's,
Yeah, and that's Bill's now, right?
I think that's right. I think
Yep.
it,
You
Is
got the
that part of
bullet.
waived, that's part, deed restricted as part of waived, you know?
As a property, that property has a deed restriction on that, that's a covenant.
But I
It's
believe it
not
was
to be
owned
built
by
on.
the Lapham family.
Right.
It's not to be built on, that's my understanding.
there was a question about, and whoever, Bill, if you're looking at the mulch pile, it might, I know there was a question about whether to put a, tactical, like firing range there when the police department was considering building, and they're still considering building a, place for target practice and scenario practice. And the mulch pile was floated as that. So I don't know if the deed is completely restricted from building or if there is some use that's allowed.
Yeah, I think, Bill, do you know Penny Young?
I know Penny and I also know Louis Lapham.
Okay.
And so,
Well, you may want to start with Penny.
Yeah.
I think Penny knows the whole deed situation there extremely well.
She does.
but you know, just as a general philosophy, you know, I know that Irwin Park has deed restrictions and there's probably deed restrictions to every piece of property that we're associated with. To the extent we can remove deed restrictions, we're better off, right? You know, and just on any property. I'm not saying we can because it's obviously up to the folks that granted it to us. And I don't know what, the interesting question I always had, I'm not sure what the economic benefit or cost might be to the person freeing up the deed restriction. Because, you know, there certainly is a restriction, and again, you know, whether there's even a tax benefit. So I'd look at that first before I talk to anybody. And that's that's easily looked at.
Yeah, I don't think Lewis is, I think only Chris Lloyd, isn't that right? Yeah. He's the only descendant who I believe would have I mean, I don't even know that he would have the power to change it, but wouldn't be Lewis.
But mulch pile too, I mean, the other thing I heard you guys talking about, it has to be on sewer, that would be on
Right,
sewer. even if
right,
they
right,
don't know, so.
But, you know, I mean, we just want to find the right site, but I think one of the things I like about the mulch pile is, I perceive there's a lot of land there, and it, you know, does potentially provide an opportunity to solve a lot of other problems, senior housing, and other type of housing as well, you know, on a long-term plan. But, I mean, that just takes a long-term plan, a lot of money and a lot of forethought. But I'm happy to look at that if you want. That's fine.
Okay, more. Other comments?
No, you have.
Okay. Go ahead, John.
Just a real quick thought, something occurred to me as you guys go through the sites, maybe think about whether they could be mixed income or affordable type.
Absolutely.
Krista, could you circulate
Yeah.
your presentation?
This will get up on the website and I'll circulate it to you guys. Also with sort of a bullet list of things to look at for each one. Perfect. There's Maria, is that, Maria's probably gone to other meetings.
It should be.
Okay. All right, so we've covered public comment, we've covered, discussion and next steps. We need to choose a next meeting date. And I looked 4 weeks out, and that's July 1st, which I'm assuming people may be traveling, so that is the holiday week. July 8th is the week following that. After that, I'm traveling, so, what are you guys' thoughts on early July, trying to get something? We don't have to do a Monday, those are just the Mondays.
I'm out of town July 1st, but I'm out, but I'm back the following.
All
The
right.
8th, we have a full committee meeting.
Oh.
Oh,
So you guys could do
We could
6
do
o'clock.
before.
Yeah.
The full committee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's easier for me to.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if I'm leaving the house, I just wanna leave for a while.
Yeah, it's easier, right? Yeah,
Yes.
I've always liked that.
An hour,
I do
not
too.
that long.
Yeah.
Do you guys wanna do, you think an hour, or you wanna start at 5:30?
We could have
July
food.
July 8th, yeah.
We could bring dinner.
Yeah.
All right, let's just say 5:30 to leave ourselves time.
Okay.
So 5:30 on July 8th is the next subcommittee meeting, and our regular meetings at 7, our full committee is
Yeah.
at 7.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. And then the last thing we need to do is approve the minutes from our April 1st and April 29th meeting. I sent them out, I think, with their agenda. 9, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Everyone in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Alright, it's unanimous, and we are adjourned.
Thank you for doing all that.
Thank you.
Well,
Great work, thank you.
Yeah, very helpful.
Figure out how to get off.
Here, I can get it figured out. I should be able to, can I figure this out? For me to see here.
I feel bad that I made Bob come just to do this, but I'm